Welcome back to the programme. It's 8:30 p.m. here in Paris. Let's remind you of our headlines. A war of words escalates between Emmanuel Macron and Bashar al-Assad, but in a press conference, the French president seems to soften his rhetoric on Syria's leader. A candlelit vigil in Berlin 1 year after a truck attack that killed 12 people. Remembrance and soul-searching from the government, which admits it got things wrong. And campaigning in Catalonia finishes ahead of Thursday's crucial regional election. In a tight race, Catalans will be voting between candidates who want to stay in Spain and those who want to leave. France's president has welcomed Jordan's king at the Élysée Palace. Emmanuel Macron and King Abdullah II discussed latest developments in the Middle East, especially Jerusalem, which Donald Trump recently recognised as the capital of Israel. Also on the agenda, Syria, where Macron was very clear in his position.
Est-ce que Bachar el-Assad est l'ami de la France? Non.
Is Bashar al-Assad a friend of France? No. Is Bashar al-Assad our main enemy on Syrian territory? No. It's the Islamic State group. Bashar al-Assad is the enemy of the Syrian people. That's in fact what created this situation that we all know, where you have millions of refugees outside of Syria, mostly present in Jordan, in Lebanon and in Turkey, but also throughout Europe, Canada and the United States. And yet Bashar al-Assad remains in place in Syria. Can we ignore him in this transition period? No. We must be realistic.
Non. Il faut être réaliste.
Well, earlier, a war of words between the presidents of France and Syria escalated, with Emmanuel Macron calling Bashar al-Assad's comments unacceptable. Macron was responding to Assad's comments earlier this week, in which he said France has no right to be involved in Syria's peace process because it had spearheaded support for terrorism in the country. And this followed a TV interview in which Macron had said that Assad must answer for his crimes in the aftermath of a military victory. Well, for more on this, let's bring in Pierre Conessa. He's a former senior official in the French Defence Ministry, now an expert and a writer on jihadism and diplomacy. Good evening to you, Pierre.
Hello.
Lovely to have you with us. We heard Macron today slightly softening the rhetoric on President Assad. He said earlier that Assad could not be ignored in the talks on Syria's future. Do you think this reflects an actual policy change for France?
No, one must begin at the beginning of this debate. The first step was, in my view, the speech of Mr. Le Drian, who explained a few days ago that it can be built peace with Assad in Syria, which means that if you want to sit around the table of diplomacy, I mean, you must be obliged, to respect, the people with whom we are supposed to build the peace. And this sentence before the beginning of the negotiation is quite surprising. So Assad reacts with this sentence explaining that France was the support of terrorism. And then the third step was Mr. Macron's speech today, in which he was, you're right, softening the question, because why it's not possible for a foreign affairs minister to explain that he won't negotiate with the guy we're supposed to meet. I mean, if you don't negotiate with your enemy, with whom?
Absolutely. I mean, we have seen France from the very beginning. Back in 2012, France was one of the first, I think, indeed the first Western country to express its support for what was then the Syrian National Council, so the coalition, rather, so essentially against Assad back then. It's not as if the French government and the Syrian government, Assad's government, has any love lost. Do you think this current escalation of the war on words here between Macron and Assad is actually going to matter in the grander scheme of things for the situation in Syria at the moment, the global situation?
Well, I think that when you think to try to analyze the position of President Assad, I think that we have a very long past, of disputes with him. You remember Mr. Fabius, our former Minister of Foreign Affairs, was explaining that Assad has not to be alive, And so we have support, I would say, the Democratic Party, the opposition in Syria. But as you know, a lot of armaments have flowed from the I would say, democratic parties to the Islamist one. So when Mr. Macron and Mr. Le Drian explained that we are just fighting against Daesh, the question is what should we do with al-Nusra, with a branch of Al-Qaeda, for example? So no one has a very clear position today in Syria. And unfortunately, I do think that France must be quiet about this question because we have a very long past of, I would say, wrong steps, you know.
Do you think then what we're seeing today with Macron and this slight softening of that rhetoric is perhaps him trying to do that? He's trying to now roll back from a situation where France initially had said we are absolutely anti-Assad, we do not see Assad in the future of Syria. Now he's saying, well, hang on, maybe we do need to talk to Assad.
Yeah, he declared that in June of this year, just after the election, explaining that it's possible to imagine that we have to negotiate with Assad for the future of the democratic Syria. So he had done this step you are explaining, which was not the position of the former government. And now I don't understand why this difference between our foreign affairs minister and the president. So the president has, on my view, a very wise position. He's obliged to react to accusation explaining that we support terrorism. That's not true. But he is trying, you know, to soften the situation.
What would your advice be as a former official in the French Defence Ministry? What would your advice be to the government? The picture in Syria, as we've described, is so fragmented now. There isn't, the government and an opposition as such. It is absolutely fragmented. How would you advise them to proceed?
That's a very difficult question. The question is not so clear about Syria because for a long time before the terrorist attack in France, we are just fighting against Assad. You remember what a mistake. We have been obliged, to wait for the 2015 after the terrorist attack to explain that our first enemy was Daesh. And after that, we decided to bomb in Syria because you remember that the French aircraft were not targeting Syrian targets. So I think that we have a very long past, and I'm sorry to notice that regarding the military means we have and the capability we have to wait on the situation, we should be more softer in our speeches, mainly coming from our diplomats.
There we go. Pierre Conessa, thank you very much. So urging caution to the French government in its dealings with Syria. Pierre Conessa, a former senior official in the French Defence Ministry. 19 migrants have arrived at a Paris airport, all part of a new programme by the French government to try and improve the way people who come to the country are treated in their first days. Macron is trying to push through a new immigration law, and this could be its first test, as Robert Sutton-Mattox reports.
Taking their first steps on French territory, these migrants brought from Africa on a new French programme. It's the end of a long and painful journey through many dangerous roads and refugee camps.
Back home, I was a student for a long time. I hope the French government will allow me to continue my studies before going to work.
These refugees from Central Africa and Sudan are the first to be selected for the new programme. They are part of a total of 3,000 that will be welcomed.
Among the 19 that arrived today, we have 11 children, as well as small children and pregnant women. Very often women who are isolated, who can be vulnerable. This is why we are happy that if they are vulnerable refugees, they have the chance to succeed here in France.
And the first stage of their new life in France, important paperwork. Documents attesting to their status as refugees. Inside these envelopes, a card granting them residence for 10 years. The procedure is sped up thanks to the interviews that have already taken place in refugee camps in Chad and Niger by the French authorities.
The people arriving already have much of their paperwork done before they come. They get their refugee status as soon as they set foot in France. It simplifies the integration process. It allows them to have a residence permit, but also access to social and medical rights.
Meanwhile, in Niger, thousands of migrants continue to flee through Libya and to the hell they say they find there.
The situation in Libya is not good. Everyone is armed. All of them are police or traffickers. They want our money.
The new programme hopes to relieve transit countries like this and stop more migrants from attempting the treacherous crossing of the Mediterranean.
Germans are remembering those killed in an attack on a Berlin Christmas market that happened exactly a year ago with a candlelit vigil. Earlier, Chancellor Angela Merkel inaugurated a memorial to the 12 people killed when a man drove a truck through the crowded square. She pledged to help survivors and to improve the authorities' response to such attacks. Merkel has come under fire from relatives in an open letter earlier this month for the way security services failed to stop the attack and the authorities' handling of the aftermath. Earlier, the president joined top German officials in admitting there were mistakes made on both fronts. Well, for more on that, let's bring in Sam Pierre, a counter-terrorism consultant and the CEO of security consultant firm Mosecon. Jan, thank you for joining us here on France 24. I want to start with Merkel, who's been criticised because this attack last year wasn't intercepted beforehand. Anis Amri, the perpetrator, was known to security services. Nothing was done. That's what the relatives have criticised her for. Now, do you think this is indicative of a failing in German intelligence services?
Good evening. Yes, absolutely. That's probably the biggest change over the last year is all the inquiries, the inquests that have revealed more. Every time it just got worse. The mishaps, the attempts cover up. At first it was, well, they followed Amri until they were able to watch Amri until September. Then it came out earlier this week that actually they knew about him already in November of 2015. So it always seems to get worse. And of course, right in the middle of it is Berlin police and the German foreign services. So, it really is worse. But that attack hopefully created a situation where they recognized that there were indeed mistakes made, which is sometimes not obvious at first. But not only to recognize those mistakes, but also to be able to work on them as well.
And of course, Jan, you're in Germany. What's been done there since last year's attack to change the way that German intelligence responds to potential threats before they happen?
Well, it's pretty much it's the same but different in terms where there's a greater level of accountability. There's been they've hired much more personnel in the hundreds. Their goal is to reach about 3,500 new employees in that sector within the next 2 years. There's been a lot of investments, a lot of technology, but before that's actually implemented, it takes time. So it's the same, but it's different. There's been a lot of, obviously it was a big part of the election campaign in September. How do you deal with security? And as the mishaps were revealed, then obviously the pressure on the security services themselves to try to explain those mistakes and then to correct them, that's been the biggest change, aside from hiring more personnel.
And of course, Germany has always defended its citizens' rights to privacy in recent history. Is last year's attack likely to change that, do you think? Will the security services encroach more on that privacy in an effort to keep citizens safe?
The biggest law actually concerning surveillance in Germany was actually enacted prior to the attack last year on Breitscheidplatz. So it's not as if it became a bigger issue afterwards. What really became an issue is the amount of cameras, video surveillance throughout Germany. And this was made because, well, they couldn't pick him up afterwards. They couldn't really follow where Anis Amri went and where he escaped afterwards. And as the months and weeks went along, they sort of found out, well, it doesn't, cameras don't work as a preventive measure, but they work as an investigative measure. So the debate is still open, but the enthusiasm, if so to speak, that was there within 6 to 8 weeks after the attack is long gone. And the debate right now is really more, can we reform security services well enough to make sure that cases like Amri no longer happen?
Sam Pierre, a counter-terrorism consultant, thank you very much for your time there.
Thank you.
Campaigning is wrapping up in Catalonia ahead of Thursday's regional election. Catalan voters will be choosing between pro and anti-independence candidates in a vote that will shape the region's future. A record turnout is expected, but the result is likely to be so close as to deny either side a clear majority. Catalonia's former regional president, Carles Puigdemont, will be holding his rally via video link from Belgium, where he remains in exile. He's up against his former deputy Oriol Junqueras, who's running on a separate ticket, and against them both is Inés Arrimadas, who's fighting for a unified Spain. Emerald Maxwell takes a look at those campaigns ahead of the vote.
It was the final debate before Catalonians head to the polls, in what's been a bitterly contested race between those who support secession and those who'd rather remain in Spain. Inés Arrimadas, leader of the biggest pro-unity party, Ciudadanos, stayed on message.
I'm convinced that on December 21st we can leave the independence process behind and start a new political era, a reconciliation in Catalonia.
But not all the leading candidates could take part. Arrimadas' main pro-independence rival, Oriol Junqueras, is contesting the election from jail. He's been there since October, over his role in Catalonia's illegal independence referendum.
The Spanish state is allergic to democracy. It is so allergic to us practicing democracy now or on October 1st that it completely alters the rules of the game. It does not respect the democratic rules of the game, and that is what prevents Oriol Junqueras from being here today.
In Thursday's ballot, his party is nonetheless tipped to become the largest separatist force in parliament. Junqueras has criticised his fellow pro-independence candidate, Carles Puigdemont, for fleeing the country after the independence vote. The region's ousted president has been campaigning for his party from his self-imposed exile in Belgium. It's still unclear whether he'll return to Spain, where he faces up to 30 years in prison. Madrid called Thursday's election hoping the vote would end the political uncertainty hanging over Catalonia. But it looks likely to be disappointed, with polls suggesting neither separatists nor unionists will win a majority.
It's been a week since 2 journalists were detained in Burma, and still no word on where they're being held. The pair are accused of breaching the country's Official Secrets Act, which carries a sentence of 14 years. They're being denied contact with their families or with a lawyer, as Robert Sutton-Maddox reports.
There was once a schoolteacher who loved trees. These are the words of Wallone, an author of children's books and a Reuters journalist, now imprisoned by the Burmese regime, together with his colleague, Cha So-woo. They are accused of illegally acquiring information with the intention to share it with foreign media. Wallone was a son of poor rice farmers, but he dreamed of a life as a journalist. He met his wife, Pane Mon, while working at the English-language Myanmar Times.
Wallone is a good husband to me, a good employee in his workplace, and he continues to learn so he can further his education. He's not a politician at all. He is a real journalist. I believe he wouldn't do anything wrong. That's why I want my husband to be free as soon as possible.
Since July 2016, he has been at Reuters, where he quickly made his mark with in-depth stories on sensitive subjects, including land grabs by the powerful military junta. Cha So-woo worked at Reuters too. He was also a creative soul. He loved writing and composing poetry. He reported on the army's crackdown in Rakhine province in the aftermath of militant attacks on security forces.
As a journalist, he covers news, and I think he does it fairly because he does not discriminate between races. He just acknowledges that they are all human.
In many ways, they're symbols of the new Burma, pursuing careers that would have been impossible in the junta era into which they were born, but careers that remain ever dangerous.
It's time now for our focus report, and today's comes from our team in northern Syria. Cities there have been won back from the Islamic State group over the last couple of years, and one neighbouring country is using the liberation as a way to exercise influence in the region. This report from Fatma Kizilboga and Hussein Assad.
This line of trucks grows a little longer every day. now stretching several kilometers along the border between Turkey and Syria. The trucks carry goods that Ankara allows to be transported to areas controlled by the Free Syrian Army Brigades, who benefit from its support.
Most of the time we transport iron and cement to supply to construction work in areas controlled by the Turkish army, but we're not allowed to go further down south past Jarablus.
These drivers are not the only ones crossing the border. According to the Turkish authorities, an average of 200 refugees return to Syria each day. This is a one-way ticket home. They will not be allowed back into Turkey.
It's time to go back now. We've spent the past 5 years here in Turkey and we miss our family, our people. So this is why we're heading back to Syria, to Jarablus.
Jarablus, a city backed by the Turkish border, was retaken last year from the hands of the Islamic State organization as part of the Operation Euphrates Shield launched by Ankara. Since then, the city has changed dramatically. Its reconstruction has been led by this man, Yaşar Aksanyar. He's the person in charge of coordinating the aid sent by Turkey. The Syrians call him governor, like the days of the former Ottoman Empire.
9 districts are located within our security zone, under our protection. 1.5 million people are living there in peace and comfort.
Security in the city centre is entrusted to the new police force, made up of former opposition rebels. 600 men, trained and equipped by the Turkish army, are now responsible for policing the population. But this sergeant admits that the safety of this region of northern Syria relies mainly on the presence of Turkish soldiers.
Our Turkish friends support us enormously. They advise us, sometimes they stand guard with us and provide us with information and weapons. Most importantly, they provide us with weapons.
This support is far from limited to military matters. In Jarablus, even the fire trucks come from Turkey. The Turkish post has opened an office. An ATM has been installed, although it is not working yet. They have even built children's playgrounds. But after years under the tyranny of Daesh, everyone's attention is focused on the new courthouse. The judge offers us a tour, and we understand very quickly that certain subjects remain taboo.
Buyurun. Bizim savcımız Firas Muhammed, Cerablus'un savcısı.
A former lawyer at the Aleppo bar and a member of the Turkmen minority, he was promoted after the arrival of the Turks in the region.
In the end, we are the ones who decide. If that is what you imply, the decisions go back to the Syrian judges. But it's true that the Turks support us and advise us, because state bodies here had been destroyed. Thank God Turkey is a great country and helps us not only from a logistic point of view, but also by providing us with legal advice.
The children are back at their school, renovated by Ankara, and dedicated to the memory of the victims of the coup attempt in Turkey. The syllabus has also been modified. While French was traditionally taught as a second foreign language, it has been replaced by Turkish. And the teachers are former refugees, returning after several years in Turkey.
French is no longer being taught here in Jarablus, contrary to the rest of Syria. Turkey is a friend and an ally, so we believe children should learn the language. Later, if they want to study in Turkish universities, it will be easier for them to do so.
It is impossible to escape the influence of Turkey. The only hospital in the city was built by Ankara, and the patients are greeted by a portrait of President Erdogan, acclaimed here as a hero.
He's done more things for Syria than anyone else. What have the Arab countries done for us? Nothing.
If they leave, there'll be no more education for children, no more housing, no more help. People will kill each other. It's better that they stay.
The mayor of Jarablus, also of Turkmen origin, is particularly pleased about the situation.
I hope the Turks never leave. At the very least, I hope that they stay a bit longer. Otherwise, everything will get complicated.
Officially, Erdogan promises that his army will remain in this border region of Turkey as long as necessary in order to maintain order and security. Ankara intends to have a say in the reconstruction of Syria, which has already begun, at least in this part of the country.
And I'll be back at the top of the hour with all the latest from Spain ahead of Catalonia's crucial regional vote on Thursday. Do stay with us here on France 24.
Because a new paper